Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are looking at functions that have been tagged as experimental in Wolfram Language, which we are considering their future and how they should be promoted or developed in future versions. Starting off. Oh boy. Look, entity function is part of the whole giant gaggle. I mean, okay. Does Michael want to comment on this? How happy is Michael with this?
I have used it. I haven't used it much to make a final comment. I guess it's also much more important for the database side than for the built-in knowledge base.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
I'm not I don't entirely agree with this statement, because I think that entity function behaves like an entity property, and this is really important. And as such, even when applied on built-in entities or entity classes, it has a different behavior.
yeah, but so for example, we're not even defining here is an exception since the formal parameter. I mean, come on, guys. You know, this is a giant, you know, it's a giant thing where we're putting beautiful wrapping paper around some pretty ugly external stuff.
Yeah, sure. But even when you are not dealing with the external stuff.
Well, okay, so what can I do efficiently with internal stuff? So for example, let's imagine that I want to get, okay, so let's get,
the point,
hold on.
The point is not how efficient it is internally. The point it has different semantics than function. So if you apply a function,
that's a pathetically small number of examples. And where's the third argument example? I thought that there was a, how do I get the mean weight of all satellites? Okay, so if I say,
entity class?
Well, if I say this, and I say satellite here, and I say entity function of,
that is going to map. That's why it's not the same semantics.
Okay, fine. So what do you want me to do? Aggregated entity value class, aggregated entity class.
Yeah, satellite. And then comma mass goes to total. This is the shorthand. Or mean, whatever you want to do.
Okay, is that it?
And then open close mass, because that's symbolic. That stays symbolic.
What do you want me to do? Open close? What?
Mass. You have to extract a property out of this. This is just a not there. Remove one. Yeah.
Then what am I doing?
Close after mean, close, and then open again. That's property extraction.
There's 44,000 things there. What's it doing?
Tony?
It's downloading first all the satellites, then in chunks of 500s, the masses of each one, and then aggregating.
So that's not done on the server?
No.
Why not? I mean, could it be?
It could potentially, but not in the sense of translated to a database, or maybe in some cases, yes.
Okay, so this was a big splat.
Right, Stephen, if you're using 12.1, that is a known bug. I would suggest either going to 12.0. It should work in 12.0. The release version.
This should work on 12.0. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there is a known bug reported about that.
By the way, you saw my report yesterday about satellites where I was saying,
but you were speaking about time-dependent properties.
I agree. Mask could be time-dependent as well, but I don't think we tag it as such. Okay, what is it doing? Any idea?
Well,
It's explaining itself somehow.
I mean, when you say this is a very nice wrapping paper around external stuff, if you do this on a 200 gigabyte table on Postgres, it takes 3 seconds.
Yeah, well, so something is wrong here. So this wasn't a bug specific to 12.1.
Yes, I'll fix that. I'll work on that.
Do you know what it is?
I can imagine from the messages, yes.
Okay. Now, it will be interesting to know. I mean, again, the examples here are utterly inadequate. Given the amount of detail in here, the examples are just utterly inadequate. Right? Where are the examples of external databases here? I don't see them. Right? We obviously need to show that.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll add them. Anyway, my general point with respect to all the new entity class functions like aggregated, combined, filtered, etc., is that they don't have any evaluation semantics. And so that, to me, that makes it pretty clear that, I mean, we're not going to, I mean, we might add the extra arguments and stuff like that, but since they stay unevaluated and they just inform, you know, the way entity value works, I think it's fairly uncontroversial that they're not going to change, because they're just the symbolic representation of something.
Well, unless it's the wrong symbolic representation.
Yeah. But I think that if we decide that something is the wrong symbolic representation, we might as well change the name entirely rather than making backward incompatible changes.
Why do you want to keep entity store experimental? I mean, this to me is a fairly, you know, this is working.
I don't agree. I mean, I think that as soon as we get more serious about writing this stuff, we will realize that the fact that we have mixed data and metadata in the first argument only for in-memory entity stores, and then for relational databases, you only keep the metadata in the first argument, and that's completely different things if you change the first argument.
Well, if you want to make a proposal, make it now.
Okay, my proposal is that this stuff, like, for example, in the first example, you see P117, P259, etc. I would really like that to evaluate to a 2-arg version where the values of the properties are stored in the second argument, and you only keep metadata in the first.
I don't think that's obviously stupid. Tony, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the data in the store is pretty symmetric. We could do that, but
I don't understand your comment.
So we always had this discussion between metadata and not metadata. And I think we can make the split, but I don't see it's necessary.
I have a little bit reservations. Well, in a certain abstract sense, I agree with the point. But in a practical sense, when I develop an entity store, I frequently do it iteratively. And once I have the evaluated form, it's no longer so nice to edit and to process manually.
Look, the way we can get the best of both worlds is to allow both syntaxes.
Yes, but once it's not the issue of allowing both syntax. If you have one and you want to edit this one, it's in the wrong form after evaluation.
I see.
So
you guys actually positively like the single argument mixed data and metadata form that exists in Entity Store right now?
I think it's a philosophical issue. What is metadata?
Yeah, sure, but on the other hand,
right, and so relational databases have a particular model which isn't the one we're going to use.
But yeah, but on the other hand, suppose you want to, like, if you think about data set, for example, like, how do you go from an entity store to a data set? In theory, you could do just if
why
we had that.
Why isn't that a link there? When it's a link everywhere else here, why is that? That seems to be a bug in the documentation processing.
I'll file it.
Okay, go ahead.
So what I was saying is that if you look at the way dataset works, you can always say like normal of dataset and just get the data. Well, dataset has a lot of extra information that you don't see about the types and so on. And so in theory, you could do something like last of entity store and then apply dataset to that. And that's just the data. And then it gets processed with the dataset.
I don't buy that. I'm sorry. Having dataset eats entity store, that makes perfect sense. Having it be something where you can like go part 7 of data of entity store feeds into a dataset, it's not sensible.
Yeah, sure. I was not proposing that that's the syntax. What I'm saying is that conceptually, if you want to turn an entity store into a dataset, that's what you would do. And that gives you a clear split between what is data and what is metadata.
I understand, but so we can have a way that if you feed entity store into a dataset, if you say dataset of entity store, what does it do right now? Does it do anything? Tony or anybody?
So the right-hand side, where you see type goes to, that one can be a dataset. It basically strips the dataset wrapper.
What the heck is that? No, that didn't work. I understand where it says type goes to data. That I'm aware of. I know that can be a data set. But what I'm asking is whether the data set of an entity store works. And it seems to me it should work.
Well, it does, but what exactly do you expect?
I expect it to take the non-metadata part of the data set and use it.
But right? That might bring you into the situation that you have entities there, unless you want just the bare strings, that have not been registered yet.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, that's the usual problem.
No, hold on. Let's think about that. So that's the foreign key. I mean, that's the same issue you have in databases and so on. So, but the question of how you extract. Okay, so if I were to take this entity store and I just want the data set piece of the entity store, how would I do that? So you're saying that even so, well, can't we have a symbolic representation of the unregistered entity? I see it has to refer to its entity store, to its parent entity store. Well, and there's no way to do that purely symbolically without actually entraining the entity store.
Yeah,
is that right, Tony?
Yeah. So one thing that you could do is register the store and say entity value of type, comma, dataset. That might give you what you want.
But Stephen, I think that this question of the foreign keys is a little bit deeper than that algebraically, because the question is really, right now, dataset is designed to store hierarchical data. And so there is no way to represent loops. And entities and entity valued properties are links that are potentially loops.
Yeah.
And
so what's your point?
You could eagerly expand each entity to its values, but that might be infinite. Because the graph is not guaranteed to be acyclic.
But I don't understand. If the right-hand side can be an entity, then that's perfectly representable in a data set.
Lazily, yes.
Not lazily. Just sits there as an entity. It's not the value of the entity.
Yeah, it's lazy in this sense.
No, the value, the right-hand side of the thing in this association is an entity. So there's no loop. There's a loop if you were to try to follow everything and to compute things from it.
Exactly. That's my.
Okay, fine.
Entities represent links in this graph, and so if you were to eagerly expand the graph, and you have like.
But we don't have a function that does that. What would do that? I mean, we could say entity value, but that's not going to go, climbing through all of the sequence of links.
Yeah, sure. We don't have it, but.
Okay, so I don't think there's anything to discuss there.
But the point is that if you want to represent relational databases with data sets faithfully, then that's a problem.
You can't do it.
Exactly.
We already know that. You can't do it. So why are you trying? I mean, it's a wrong thing to try to do. They serve different purposes. Okay, so by the way, a suggestion on the live stream from Brian here is that there should be an example in Entity Store, which seems to have a rather anemic collection of examples. actually, we do seem to have a list of, get the list of entities of the specified type. We do seem to have an example of how to do that. That's how you discover the entities within the entity store. Okay. So, I mean, the only suggestion here, if I take a typical entity store, you know, in the function repository, in the data repository rather, there are things which are entity stores, happily, and like we could take a random entity store. I don't know what we want to do. Whatever. Let's take that one. I might even understand. Okay. All right. So this is an entity store. And you can read it in. And now the question is there a corresponding data set to be extracted from this? Right? So if I say entity list of, that's really weird that the type is called game of life. That's an arguably not very sensible thing. Wait a minute. Why is that? Oh, because I didn't say register. But if I said entity list, is there a way of doing that without registering? Tony?
No documented way.
Why wouldn't entity list, why wouldn't you be able to put the entity store in place of the entity type name?
An entity store can have multiple types.
Okay,
so
but then maybe we need a syntax for dealing with that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Why is there no, why are there no, why are there no?
You cannot register a random string.
So why doesn't it fail then?
Yeah, that's a failure. Yeah, it should have given a message there.
How do I register it? I say entity register of the entities of the entity store.
You have to, yeah.
Already exist. So it was very confused there. How did it manage to, why did it let me register the plain string? See what I'm asking?
Yes.
Oops.
So I try to make that system as general as possible. So eventually we can register any kind of object that behaves like an entity store.
Okay, types already exist. So I just did entity unregister. Why did that not work?
But Tony, at the very least,
Maybe you could say, yeah.
No, like I agree with your idea that you could, in theory, register a function that behaves like an entity store. But at the very least, when you do entity register, it should query that function for the types that it contains, and a string would
Yes,
fail.
that's exactly what it does. So I'm a little bit surprised, but yeah.
Right. And Brian on our live stream is suggesting that we have a better inspector for entity stores. Why can't we use the same kind of mechanism that we have for inspecting relational databases?
Yes, there's already an open suggestion for that. Also for a new logo or icon.
Okay, but that's all very well and good, but what's happening with it?
I can increase the priority. Yeah.
Well, what is it that you're planning to build there?
Basically using, using the same structure. Yeah.
Well, what is the structure?
For the database backed entity
What
stores.
is the structure? Because that structure is specific to two-dimensional relational databases, which is different from entity stores. Or maybe it isn't. But I don't understand.
Pretty similar, yeah.
Okay, can I understand what this should have done, right? So what we've got here, and I don't know why this goofed up, right? I mean, I am sure if I quit here and restart, why do we have in the autocomplete menu, why on earth do we have those things that come from those contexts? We just shouldn't do that. See what I'm saying? I don't know well, I don't even know where it came from there. Okay, so now here, if I say resource data of this, okay, entity register of that now, Okay. And now I say entity list game of life. Now I'll get all kinds of entities there. Okay. So now each of those entities has certain properties. How do I discover what the shape of the thing is? Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, I suppose some of that information is in here, right?
You could take an entity and say dataset to get an idea.
Or I could say entity properties.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. But so now let's imagine that I wanted to make a data set out of that entity store. I guess that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? I mean, if I just say, for example, if I were to say, I mean, I could make a data set by saying entity value. Let's just see if I can see how to do this. Game of life. And then if I say here, let's say, what's the thing? Date. Let's do date. And let's do, does it have a size here? Can anybody see a size? Why these aren't in alphabetical order by string name, I have no idea. But all right, let's say period. Okay, so the claim is Coolosaurus. So for example, I should be able to do something where I say date list plot. So that did the right thing, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, for goodness sake, what is wrong with that? Is that not treating missing correctly? By the way, does delete missing do the right thing here and delete all the, no, it doesn't.
You have to give it a level spec in this case.
Yeah,
So
but does it delete the whole object at that level?
there is a way to do that, but it's not the.
That's not what we want. To level n to be missing, if missing occurs, and by the way, the typesetting here is wrong. Raj, please report that. That is the wrong font size here. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so it's comma 2, comma 1. So it would be delete missing of that, comma 2, comma 1. No, that's wrong. 2, comma 2. No, it's just wrong. It should delete the whole element in this case, right? Do you see what I'm saying? That appeared to be right. Okay. So let's say I say, for example, date list plot of this. Okay. So this isn't completely grotesque what we have to do here. Okay. I mean, this is wrong, by the way. Raj, that needs to be reported, right? That should just have missing, that just shouldn't plot stuff, right?
Okay, I'll file the report.
Please. Yes. Okay, so now, okay. Looping back to all of this stuff, okay, I'm actually very happy with Entity Store. And I think I would like to de-experimentalize. I'm not happy with entity function, and I'm not happy with aggregated entity class. I don't think they've been used enough for anybody to know anything. And the fact that they have giant documentation of few examples isn't encouraging.
But on the other hand, given the discussion we had like last week about entity store, we're still adding stuff to it. And
like what?
Like types for properties.
Sure. But I think the basic operation of entity store is not going to change. I mean, we're adding stuff. We're adding plenty of functions we've added to for 25 years. I just don't think we're going to change the structure of entity store, whereas I think it's a well-used, well-working thing.
I see one addition that I discussed with Tony. In some non-trivial examples, you want an initialization option where you also define a bunch of functions, because you might have non-trivial computed properties that are just 10 characters, that are 20 pages of code.
Okay, fine. You're not describing something which shoots down the existing design. You're describing
No. I'm just saying that there are non-trivial additions that.
Right, that sounds nice. I mean, I think that what we are seeing, and we'll hopefully understand this better as we increase the automation of things that we do with databases, all of these lower level functions, which I think are basically the machine code of dealing with databases, will, let's see, we have an example here. This is an example from, I don't know how to pronounce this. Let's call it IC on our live stream, because I don't know how to say, oops, something went wrong there. I missed the bracket. Okay, so this is an example offered. Entity function, entity property, male population. So that entity property isn't necessary, right? It could have just been quotes male population. Is that correct, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Non-missing entity association. That's the return type of the I see, that's the entity values return type, and then this is plotting it. That's pretty cool, actually. It's a bit of a scary plot, but it's pretty cool. Why is Iceland? Sorry, I'm just looking at the actual well, okay, fine. Fascinating. Okay. It's an interesting plot, as well as being that's a pretty good example. That works quite nicely. Now, yeah, the alternative would be to map a pure, hash of male population minus female population over to do an association map over the list of countries, right?
Yeah, but I mean, and this is currently, I would consider it a bug in the entity framework, but if you subtract two properties and they're both missing, that's 0. And I think at least entity function should have the semantics of saying, if you're subtracting two missings, if at least one of the properties you're extracting is missing, then the whole thing is missing.
Look, the fact is that missing needs more semantics.
But it needs to be in the evaluation semantics of missing. It cannot be in the evaluation semantic of entity function.
Yes, I agree. And I think, as a matter of fact, that this is a good example. Both the things we just saw about missing interacting with data list plot, this is something that we should probably have an LCC item about missing and about the possibility of getting missing arithmetic to work better.
I think missing minus missing is undefined.
Why isn't it missing? I think missing minus missing should be missing.
Maybe.
And
I think it's the result of an arithmetic operation. I feel like it's undefined. It's not missing.
What is missing? Same Q missing? Equal missing?
Well, no, I think what it should do is it should have a missing with something which says that it is the result of arithmetic on a missing, because missing has a payload. And it can describe the fact that it is missing for that reason. I mean, there's different reasons things are missing. There's what's the melting point of helium or something. Missing, doesn't physically exist at STP or at standard pressure or whatever.
But what Carlo just said, like, assume you do a comparison, you also don't want equal to evaluate to true for two missing things.
Listen, let's have a discussion about missing. I think missing may need to have some kind of UUID thing inside it for exactly that reason. Can we please get that scheduled as
Yeah,
part of
yeah.
an LCC meeting?
Yeah, I
I,
can
I
bring it
think
up
we
with
had
Itai.
one already at some point.
Well, what happened with it?
I don't think we ever finished properly.
Well,
Then
so
there was
let's
also
get-
the
let's get-
question of what is a failure and what is missing. What's up? Because
Okay,
because
well,
another
let's get the
another
notes.
option is
Let's get the
another
notes
option.
and let's make sure we move it forward. I mean, now that we have a round working, which is very beautiful, I think this is kind of the next step. All right, let's take a look at Graph Store. So what do we know about, I mean, one of the use cases for this is, what on earth is this? These are import formats, right?
Yes.
And as the one famously says, it's turtles all the way down, so to speak. Okay, but so this is what is the underlying support for Wikidata data, for instance. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So I mean, this stuff is in a package anyway, right? Is it in a package and tagged as experimental?
Yes. Both.
Okay.
So there have been some small improvements that didn't make it into the first release. And I also added some new functionality. And thanks to work on Wikidata, there were some slight improvements. So I'm not sure if you want to review that in an extra session or.
I don't know. It depends on how much there is there. But my question is, other than the Wikidata data case, what are the uses? I mean, I know some outside users we happen to know have made good use of this Sparkle stuff. Do we know other categories of uses here?
Some internal users. I know of Aaron, who has been using that functionality and now and then asked me about things. So that was very good feedback.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't think there's more to discuss with this. I think it seems like the Graph Store stuff, it's working okay, but there's, you know, we're right now in a phase where we're watching the sort of usage grow.
So to summarize, keep it experimental till the usage increases?
I think so, until we understand more about
Okay.
what people are doing with it. By the way, Brian on our live stream asks a question which is utterly irrelevant to this meeting, but I wonder about this too. He's asking, why isn't touch scrolling supported under Windows? I haven't a clue, and I don't think anybody in this meeting knows, but it's a good question, and perhaps Raj could take that on to the UI folk.
Yeah, I'll pass it along.
Okay. Have we unexperimentalized anything in this database system? Have we unexperimentalized any of the functions here?
No, I mean, I voted for de-experimentalizing most of the symbolic stuff, except
But
for
has it happened? Has anything been de-experimentalized in this whole collection?
Well, you seem to be against. I mean, the only thing I'm not entirely sure about de-experimentalizing is sorted empty class, given what we're doing with sort by and the order stuff. So that's somewhere where we can.
I think that this we should let usage grow on these things a bit.
Okay.
I mean, I think that I think it's a pretty complicated subsystem, and I think yeah, I mean, hopefully, yes. All right, that brings us to ask. I personally like ask. I don't know why I haven't heard of more uses of it. Perhaps we can discuss that. I mean, in other words, you know, I think, hey, somebody's typing without being on mute. Could you change that? That why do we think it hasn't had more usage? I mean, in a sense, form function has had, I mean, for example, do you know if there are many ask functions running within our own company supporting web forms?
Not many. I mean, my idea of why.
Do you actually know? I mean, because I don't know.
Given the amount of feedback I receive on form function, that's how I get that number. Like for every 20 function I get on form function, I get one on ask. And then usually people tend to give up after a while, after a couple of questions. So
okay, so why do they give up? What is it?
My idea is that basically ask would really like to work with something which is like a coroutine, so actually interrupting the real kernel state and then going back to it. But that doesn't work with the way the cloud works right now. You can't freeze a kernel waiting for people to answer, and you can't be sure you get back to the same kernel and so on. So
okay, so you're saying that the statelessness, the fact that the state information is all carried inside the ask function and so on, you think that's inconvenient to people?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know whether we have evidence of that. I mean, people are getting confused about how to carry enough state or what?
Yeah, and there's always some implicit states. Suppose you have like some random function that's going to lead to some weird behavior in ask. So
okay, so your point is that a stateless, non-session based ask, I mean, one could imagine a version of ask that operates against a session, even though it's
we talked about it with Jan at some point, and you and we were saying that maybe it does make sense to have some kind of special, some APIs, some that are actually running against session kernels instead of public kernels, but then nothing.
Well, okay, so that's interesting. I mean, I don't think that's on the cloud roadmap. I mean, what is on the cloud roadmap, and which I think is now done, is in the persistence location stuff, being able to store stuff in a web session, right?
Yeah, that's doable, but that's not the same as keeping the same kernel.
So I understand that, but I'm asking, the web session is, okay, my question is that now supported? Is web session, is that how you're doing?
Okay, so there's a twofold answer to this. One is that I had initially imagined to use cookies rather than web sessions, which are similar but not quite the same, and cookies are not yet supported. Secondly, I can emulate that by using a couple of tricks. I don't really need to use a web session to save the state of ask. So
what was the thing that we had waited for months for web session to work?
I don't know. But I mean, I think in general, the main problem with ask is that the only person who knows how it works is me, and I have 15 other projects. So.
No, but I'm sorry, this isn't answering the question. Why? I mean, maybe that use case of people doing back and forth conversation, which is what ask, it's a complex form filling function, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the tail of the distribution of people with forms to fill, most people have simple forms to fill. And I mean, I think that the future of very complex form filling is form notebooks. We already have a technology that supports all kinds of rich entry of stuff and multiple items, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But I think that solves kind of an orthogonal problem, in that the question is like, if you have a form notebook, that's like a big one-page form that is very rich in terms of input, but it's not very rich in terms of interactivity, of going back and forth.
That's correct. But the problem is, it's like the examples of ask. I mean, like, for instance, okay, I don't know whether we've used it like for the summer school, for the application process for the summer school. Do you know, or is it just a form?
No, it's just a form because it doesn't really require to go back and stuff like that. So
Right,
it's-
because it has no contingency. I mean, that is, let's imagine that you are, I don't know, financial aid for the summer school, for example. One could imagine that there are many branches there. Oh, if you're from outside the US, do this. Oh, if you're from whatever, do this. And that could be represented as an ask function, probably quite nicely. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, except that in general, you have to reload the page every time you go forward. So, in the end, it's easier to represent it as like an interactive form that has fields that get hidden and stuff like that. On the other hand, the thing that you really cannot do in any other way than ask is to have an infinite form. So give me another exercise, give me another exercise, and so on. That's impossible. You can't keep looping.
Yeah, I understand.
Branching is relatively easy to do.
Fair enough. But so the fact is that what we are now imagining in terms of the give me another exercise thing, well, that's interesting, actually. I mean, we're imagining that that whole thing is done with form notebooks, not with this mechanism, although maybe there's a merged mechanism there that has both of those things in it. I don't know. I mean, because there's a certain amount of state information that asks. I think the issue is that there's a kind of a hole in the market of things which are more complicated than forms. I'm not sure. Anyway, I wouldn't beat yourself up too much about the design of ask. I think it's perfectly good. I think it's a question of whether it so happens. I think it's more a question of the user patterns. Let me respond to a couple of things on this live stream.
But I would like to, reopen this discussion with. We had some really nice ideas when we talked with you and Jan about conversation page and conversation API in terms of infrastructure. So maybe we should.
Yeah, right. I don't think that's on the cloud roadmap right now.
And I think that in terms of, the design might be fine, but in terms of polish, and Raj can confirm or deny this, Ask still has quite a lot of bugs.
Raj?
Yep, that is the case. Ask never, let me look up the exact number, but I do remember that we had run into several issues when we were testing Ask functionality.
And there are also meta issues, like Sean was complaining that Ask is particularly difficult to test automatically. So who knows how many more there are that we haven't found.
Yes. Well, why can't we use it, test it with web execute?
Yeah, we can. And I guess that's how it's being tested, but it's because the model is complicated and also the testing is complicated.
Right. Questions from our live stream. Is it possible to get a dated entity function? Interesting. Using the dated wrapper, how do we, what does that exactly mean? That means that you're using the attribute, the dated attributes, state attributes of an entity property in the entity function. That makes sense? Can you have a think about that?
The dated wrapper should work inside the entity function, but not outside.
Inside as in this entity property could be dated here, right? But the entity property itself, the entity function itself, the dated wrapper will not flow into the entity. It probably doesn't know how deep to flow. If the entity function is dated, which properties are
correct
can be dated? So I think that's the problem. Okay, Ethan is saying ingesting unstructured text to get relationship tuples in a graph. What is being asked for there? So you mean take the sentence, the sky is blue or something, and be able to turn that into a kind of symbolic representation of that statement? Yes, well, we actually have a bunch of things going on in that direction, although I don't think we want to, I'm not a great believer in just making some random, we could make a sort of random probabilistically determined sort of graph out of that. I don't think that's all that useful. I think it's amusing, but not very useful. But it is an interesting, I mean, we actually have in the generalization of text cases, that's a thing that we are looking at being able to do. Might be worth it if it just put that on the next machine learning agenda.
Sure.
Talk about that. Self-supervised information entity relation extraction. Well, interesting. I mean, yeah, that's what we're talking about here. I mean, we do remarkably well now at entity extraction. We do not do entity relation extraction at this time, although that is a direction that we're looking at. Find textual answer effectively is doing that. But I agree that it is exposable now. It's actually interesting. I mean, the question of how would we best expose it? What would be the structure that we expose? So in other words, given a piece of text, we would say basically this piece of text is equivalent to the following. You can basically extract a graph store out of this piece of text, is what we're saying. Yeah, that's interesting. We should talk about that. Okay, we are running out of time here. And our next, oh boy. Speak of the devil of find textual answer. So I actually think a lot more of these can be de-experimentalized than you're indicating here. Really a lot more. Do we have Etienne here?
Etienne is on his way. I just
okay,
got
we've run out of time. There's no point in doing this right now.
Yep, he's here.
However, we just ran out of time. So I think we're going to do this another time. I was just saying that I think a lot of these functions are much more robust and could be de-experimentalized. And I'd like to hear the arguments for not de-experimentalizing them.
Okay.
And yeah, okay. Let's start the next meeting with this. But I think we have to, yeah, Ethan is saying there's a lot of machine learning research on knowledge ingestion, well aware. And, things like find textual answer are fine state-of-the-art things, and they're just not as useful as you might hope. The suggestion was being made, which is actually not a bad one, of being able to have from something like, it's a merger of text cases and find textual answer, of being able to return essentially the symbolic extracted graph store from a piece of text, which effectively we have, but we're not exposing that. And the question is, do we have a way to expose it? In other words, could we build an entity store from a piece of text? If it says, the weight of the rhinoceros is 7.2 tons, the weight of the flea is, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, so fact extraction.
Yeah, thing. Right. But I mean, being able to essentially build a known structure like an entity store from a piece of text is an interesting idea. Because what we have, I mean, if we do like I don't know, what's a short Wikipedia article? If we say, let's say, oh my gosh, I don't know, what's a really obscure kind of animal? A quokka. How about that? Let's hope the article about quokkas is fairly short. I should have actually.
The problem with turning into an entity store rather than a graph store is that you're putting in a lot of assumptions about the types of things that you have in.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, so is this going to work?
Should be.
It might take a little while. Yeah. Yeah, this has probably got a lot of stuff in it. I mean, this isn't absurdly long. There we go. Okay, so this is now extracting. So it's got 149 pieces there. Wow, what the heck is that? Oh, not this again. I think this is what version am I using? I think I'm using 12.1 here. I think this is the same bug that we keep on seeing. Raj?
I'll take a look.
Same thing. Same thing. I report it every few days. Same thing. Okay. In any case. All right. So this is saying this is, I don't know what two peoples is. Okay.
Found reserve land. I'm surprised. It's cool.
That's impressive. Yeah, it's impressive. Western Australia Administrative Division, Rottnest Island is an island. Okay. A lot of good stuff here. Gilbert's potteroo. Well, it seems to be a species since it said it was critically endangered. Other things could be critically endangered, I suppose, in the world. Okay, so there's a lot of good stuff here that it really did tag correctly. Now, what it didn't do is to say that property blah, blah, blah of a quokka is, well, the quokka is known to live for an average of 10 years. So it didn't say, you know, quokka, it didn't make an entity store which said quokka lifespan, because right now it's not doing it. In fact, that's a thing. That's what it really needs to do, is to do the extraction of properties as well as the extraction of entities here, right? If it could do that, then it could turn that into an entity store that says quokka lifespan 10 years, right?
Yeah, then definitely. I mean, that's a bigger project, and I think entity extraction is the first step for that.
Which we already have, and we have good entity extraction.
Yeah. I mean, which we are still improving, but yeah. And but
we
then
don't have property extraction. I mean, we don't have the extraction of named property.
We don't have. I mean, entity. I mean, property is not. Yeah, it's really about context. So I guess normally the first step is first the entity, and then from the entity try to figure out, you know, I mean, a bit Wolfram Alpha style. If we can figure out a property related to this entity.
Yeah, Ethan is saying, could find textual answer be extended to look for new entities that are not already known? Well, new entities where we can guess the. See, the thing is, if you say Mr. John Smith or something, but let me be more obscure, Mr. Quokka fish. There's a decent chance that Mr. is a clue that quokka is a first name and fish is a last name, even though that's a category of entities that is sort of infinite, if I'm making sense. Right. So, I mean, right now, we don't usually have a marker for something being, the entities we're identifying are ones that plausibly could be in our system, correct? As opposed to like people's names, where we don't have the 7.6 billion or whatever it is names in there. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a question? Like, we have fine textual answers. Do we have like symbolically represent this question? Like the second argument of fine textual answers.
No, like we absolutely do not.
In the end, when you say how tall is, I don't know, George Clooney, that's really entity and property. It just misses the value. So if we could have a symbolic representation of the
I know, but that's not the thing. Is that if we have entity and property, then if we've done our job from a curation point of view, we probably have the value.
Sure, but my point is, suppose George Clooney is something that doesn't exist in our system, and height is something that doesn't exist in our system. You like fine textual answer understands the questions and can extract it from the text.
No,
and whatever you put as entity and property are just a symbolic stand-in. They don't have to map to something in our system.
But they do if it's going to be useful. I mean, that's the fact is, the ultimate way to do this is the whole symbolic discourse language project, which we're slowly working towards. But I think it would be interesting I mean, the problem is, by the time we know both the entity and the property, we probably know the value. The thing that is sort of interesting is parameterized entities, where there's a potentially infinite class of entities where we know the type of the entity, but we don't know which particular entity of that type it is, of which people, companies, things like that are good examples.
Sure, but I mean, I think an equally interesting question is like, this text contains this many grammatically valid statements about things we actually don't know what they are, but it is saying.
I don't know how useful that is to know that. I mean, I think that what people need is, look, fine textual answer is fine and state of the art and not very useful. Because you can't trust the results. I mean, it is somewhat useful for scanning. I mean, I'm sure it can get a decent grade in one of those SAT essay comprehension tests, if that's our criterion. But look, I think the interesting case, which is the one worth discussing, is parameterized entity types, like people, for instance, where we know what type it is, and therefore we know certain properties, but we don't know which instance of that entity type it is. We also, it's even, it's non-trivial to disambiguate them, but that's a case that I think will be interesting for text cases, for instance, Etienne.
Yeah.
We know it's a person, but we don't know the person that we know, where we actually know about that person. We simply know that it is a person.
Yeah.
And then we could do some interesting extraction kinds of things. Anyway, for a different meeting, but interesting topic. And I need to run off here. Well, thanks, guys. To be continued. And thank you to people on the live stream. Interesting comments and questions. And look forward to hearing from you all soon. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.